So welcome and thank you all for joining another Advertising Matters Views from the Frontline. We plough on happily every week, and thanks to those particularly who join every week since April, our core audience, which we'll have to find a brand name for, something like Zoomies. Today we talk to the most important people in the jigsaw, which is advertisers. Now firstly, and I know regulars will get annoyed about this, but just let me rattle through some housekeeping because I'm always asked this and we have new viewers every week. So no, we are recording us, we are not recording you. Although I think I can see John Holland doing his earning, but apart from that, if you're interested and you want to see the proof of that, if you go to my LinkedIn page or YouTube, you'll see a recording there normally later on this afternoon. So we can see you, so you can relax, watch, listen, and hopefully find it of interest. We'll poll you at the end, slightly different poll to the usual one, just to try and get some better feedback. And you always do give us good feedback, and we appreciate that. I always say it seriously that if I can help your business, or indeed if anybody up here can help your business, you have my email, you have my phone number, do not hesitate. The people up here are good people and they're very happy to help, and I know that without even asking them. And if you want advertising, video, or webinars or ad tech, I'll buy you lunch. I'm Stuart Fogarty of Admatic Ad Tech, Streambet the video agency, and AFA O'Mara Advertising, and my job today is simply just to moderate the discussion, try and keep it going and try and keep it good and positive. Admatic builds self-op direct media booking engine, Streambet does video, and we are, thank God, as I said that last week, there seems to be small little green shoots of people getting back, and it's great to see. And AFMR does advertising consultancy for companies and brands, so a little bit of green shoots over the last 2 weeks, hurrah. It's appreciated that you're here, really hope it's a benefit. It is over in 1 hour. We start a little bit later to allow people to log on, and we'll end at about 2:05, a little bit after 2 o'clock. So again, I'm Stu the Exotic in the advertising jungle here in our offices. And in fact, interestingly enough, Tiger King, which I'm sure you've all seen on Netflix, is now Netflix's biggest ever show, which is kind of extraordinary when you look at things like The Staircase and Making a Murderer and indeed Stranger Things. Over 30 million viewers, and that's ad-free viewers. That's pretty extraordinary. Joining us this week is Siobhan O'Connell, as she's just got the new June issue of Business Plus magazine to the printer. Buy it if you can. But any good, Siobhan? Anything good in the magazine?
It's excellent, Stuart. It's a whopper of an issue. What we're trying to get across for small business is that making an impact online, which is what small businesses need to do now as they all seek to secure their businesses, requires decent investment. And that's a lot more than the €2,500 online voucher currently available from LEOs. Big companies, we're focusing on the most popular shares traded in the Irish Stock Exchange. Some of them are cancelling dividends, drawing down lines of credit. So we're looking to see whose balance sheets are stretched and is there an opportunity to make a punt if you have some spare cash. And then we're also looking at whether the corona crisis requires a new type of rescue process for micro firms, because examinership is too expensive a lot of times for mom and pop firms. And our editorial line is basically putting it up to Pascal Donoghue and saying, if a government is formed before Christmas, there's an opportunity for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens to deliver a lot more for micro firms and SMEs. And if they believe, as Pascal says, the multinational bounty isn't going to last forever, he's got to work a lot harder now to prove that.
Great stuff. And on the shelves when?
It's on the shelves tomorrow.
Great. Grant.
And did I mention our replica digital edition?
Absolutely. Must have. And of course, Irish Marketing Journal AdWorld, who have supported these sessions from the start, simply would not happen without the great John McGee, who's with us as usual. John McGee, or Jack, is the CEO of Irish Marketing Journal IMJ, which was actually many years before John McGee ever got involved, started by my dad, Aubrey, as the AFA in-house magazine. I bet you didn't know that. He called it Irish Marketing Journal, really to try and hide the fact that it was an agency newsletter. So a bit of marketing going on there, probably more salesmanship. John is also fabadworld.ie. If you don't subscribe to it, do. If you've been interested in advertising, every Friday, it's free. Subscribe to adword.ie, and of course he writes for the Sunday Independent every Sunday. Jack and Siobhan will contribute as we go. Our three guests this week are Barry Dooley, who's the CEO of the Association of Advertisers in Ireland, who should be on everyone's Christmas card list. And Barry also, I know from his agency background in Saatchi's and Irish International, and in fact, ironically, he looked after for 20 years Barry's tea advertising when I worked on the other British tea brand, and therefore he knows our next guest, and also does Jane McDade, who was with us last week from Think House. So we welcome Camille O'Flanagan, who's the marketing director of Barry's Tea, and also a member of the AAI. Not a member of the AAI, but I'm sure about to join, is Aidan Doyle, who's the marketing director and PR director with Kia Motors, a business, again, I understand a bit from working on Suzuki with one of the best clients ever, Declan Maguire, and I'm only saying that because he's watching. So very welcome to you, one and all. So first, Barry, if I can go to you, how are things at AAI, and can you give us a sense maybe as to how advertisers are feeling? Neil Thompson also had a question, how clients view agencies and what their role is in this new comeback. So maybe if you just would give us a sense of how things are.
Yeah, I just want to say before I start that not everything I'll be commenting on is a shared view of AAI members. What is important for me to say at the outset is that a great deal of my content comes from evidence-based research, either in Ireland, the UK, or through the World Federation of Advertisers. In addition, when I get into marketplace data and metrics, I want to acknowledge the assistance of Alan Cox and Core, Lee MacDonald and his colleagues in Dentsu, and last but not least, Peter McPartland. So that's my sales pitch out of the way.
Okay.
The AAI has been in operation since 1951. The role of the AAI is to protect and defend the reasonable freedom to advertise. I can't get into the specific details on the members and how they've been getting through COVID. But I think most of you know through your contacts, your meetings, discussions of some weird examples that are going on out there. If you're involved in tourism, hospitality, or travel, it must be a nightmare. If you're involved in the drinks industry, according to the Sunday Indo, Diageo, CNC Gleeson and Heineken are recollecting 300,000 kegs because the best before dates have expired, which is probably described as one of the biggest logistical challenges ever to face that industry. FMCG companies were flat out producing enough stocks so as to meet the increasing demands from the retailers and multiples. This, I'm told, necessitated alternative shifts of production crew, split teams in the event that someone caught the virus. Retailers and multiples incurred extra costs installing protective measures, sanitizing facilities, staff hours and pay, and home deliveries. And there was and is an imperative for companies and businesses to look after the safety and well-being of their staff. I heard two people talking in a multiple on a Sunday, and one lady said that she was due back on at 5 a.m. the following morning. All of this with people working remotely. Depending on your conditions at home, some find this very challenging. And in summary, the logistics across all the sectors of AAI and non-AAI members have been incredible. The AAI supports a reasonable, sustainable and viable climate in which it can operate and contribute to Ireland's economy and society. To do that, we, like any other industry, rely on stakeholders to work with us in a spirit of partnership. And I guess that's why we're driving the agenda in our proposal to the Minister for Finance for a 25% tax incentive on advertising investments over a 2-year period. Any increase in spend will drive economic growth and will create additional marketing activity in these extraordinary challenging times. The current forecasts as a result of COVID suggest a decline of 30% in the overall market, namely 316 million. Advertising spend in Ireland is circa 20% below the Western European average. So when the advertising spend in the market reduces, this results in negative costs to the economy. I should also highlight the important role that advertising plays in funding the largely free media and cultural Irish ecosystem. All of the national and local newspapers depend on advertisers for at least 70% of their funding to support Indigenous journalism. 100% of the commercial radio network is funded by advertising support, and at least 50% of RTÉ's output depends on commercial funding, not to mention the millions of euros which help to subsidise everything from the GAA to the National Tidy Towns competition, all underwritten by commercial sponsors. Much of this money is in severe jeopardy because of the crisis. According to the respected economist Joseph Stiglitz, the defining characteristic of this crisis is uncertainty. Every business sector, including the collective marketing, media and creative community, is likely to be decimated if ad spends falls in the way predicted. This is why we need some support from the government. In addition to writing to Pascal Donoghue, I've also sent a note to the Taoiseach, Eamon Ryan, Micheál Martin and Alan Kelly, given that there's a formation about to take place of a new government. In Italy, they have successfully negotiated a 30% tax incentive on their advertising, and there are measures in place in Australia as well. Most of the other countries in Europe have submitted proposals to their respective governments.
So do you feel positive about it, Barry? Do you feel that that it will be well received?
Well, he's quite a busy man at the moment, I've been told, and I guess that was going to be the result. I do feel positive that we'll get in and make a case. With the help of Peter McPartlin, the two of us have prepared a deck. It's gone into the minister.
Okay.
And we're waiting on a call to go down.
Okay.
We have had a positive feedback from his officials.
Well, you're in good hands with Peter. I say that principally because I know he's watching, but that's good. Thanks very much, Barry. Camille, how are things in the world of tea? Has lockdown meant more tea and sympathy?
Well, I suppose we're fortunate that that people have turned to products that provide comfort and that they can trust. And that's what the brand always has been, and it will continue to be that way. At the beginning, it was for the first few weeks, as Barry spoke about there, it was our main focus was actually ensuring that we had enough stock to provide retailers with, because there was a surge in demand for keeping products on the shelves. So our initial challenge was how can we produce enough to be able to give to the retailers? And what we did was we normally had one shift. I think people started at 8 o'clock in the morning and finished at 4:20 on the production line, and then one would start at 7. Another shift I think came on at 3, and they'd continue on till 11 o'clock at night. So what was very important was the safety of the staff. And the shifts provided that, and also everybody who was in the offices, we all just went straight to home, took our laptops with us and our paper and our pens, and we all set up at home. So since then, sales have, there was the initial surge, but sales have leveled off, we also, the food service sector, as Barry spoke about there, has been decimated. So it's really good that the food service sector is starting to open up, and time will tell where things level off. In terms of advertising, we'd been working on an ad for TV last year, and it was finished in January and it appeared in February. And the ad that we worked with Think House, like the story was of family, of sisters, of connecting, of Skyping online, time out, and all the things that actually fit what's going on now. So, but then so that worked well for us. But then on the other hand, we just made a radio ad, and we're very happy with it because we've only been on air with radio at Christmas with our Christmas ad. So we said, let's try something else, and we had a lovely ad made using the soundtrack that we had on the TV ad, but we had to pull it because it just wasn't relevant to where consumers were at now. So so a mixed bag, but we have our plans, the plans that we laid, we're continuing to work on them.
In fact, if you wanted to write a television commercial that reflected COVID, it would be the commercial that you have on air, I would think, just as it happens, isn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing. And it did. I suppose when we're looking at creating advertising, we always want something that tells a story, and we always want something that touches people's hearts, because if it does, that's when you've really hit the money. And actually it was a real story. So we did something that was a real story. And the other thing was that we actually, when we were working on the creative with Think House, it was targeting younger tea drinkers, younger people, and being very in tune with how they think. And really it ended up being an ad that was a sort of a version of previous advertising that we did. So sometimes you don't have to go really wacky or to actually hit the note right, So yes.
I must say, we had Jane McDade on last week, and in fact I was complimenting her, and indeed before all of this, about the commercials, because I just thought they were smashing. I really thought it was a great job, I think. So thanks, Camille. Aidan, car sales obviously going through the roof. So what's the plan for the return, and how are we getting on?
It's just for a bit of context on Kia itself as a brand. It's actually not a lot of people realize it. Kia is actually part of the Hyundai Motor Group, which is a big multinational, and it's probably the 5th biggest manufacturer in the world. So our sister company, who are both our biggest competitor, Hyundai in Ireland, are an independent distributor, a bit like Toyota and we're a subsidiary of Kia Motors Europe. So we're currently around 6% of the Irish market, and we're firmly established as a top 10. I myself now come from motoring background because I previously worked with Opel as a marketing manager, and myself and Arnold O'Byrne, our tagline when we're in company and the Opel brand is mentioned, we sort of say, well, we left it at around 12%, you know, so we left it in good shape. But going back to your question, the car market has tanked. So just basically fallen off a cliff in April, like sales were down 95%. And it's looking, last year's market was 117,000. And we're probably lucky this year if we'll hit 75,000. Wow. Now, cars are a unique, you know, they're a big high-end purchase. The average price of a car that people are buying nowadays is probably around 25 grand. So they're a unique barometer and always have been for consumer confidence. You know, so when people start buying cars again, particularly new cars, we know the economy has turned a corner. So as we move into July, and it's too early for us to say at the moment, you know, we're looking at a huge amount of the car market relies on the grey market. So we're looking at two segments: people with cash in the bank, and then people who borrow. So the threats we have going forward is that the people with cash are going to sit on it and not spend, or maybe spend it on something else, maybe home improvements or a heat pump or something like that. And then the people who may wish to purchase, the banks may decide, well, you were good for a loan last year, but you're not good this year. So that's a big threat for us. Now, the opportunity is that as we see the economy, and talk about your green shoots, as we see the economy reopening, is that some people might decide that, okay, no, I'm fine, I'm going to spend, I plan to buy a new car in July and I'm going to do it. And I know that right in the heart of lockdown, I had a conversation one day with Shane Lynch in our ad agency, and he said his next door neighbor had taken delivery of a 70 grand BMW in late March. So there was a guy that said, look, I'm sort of L'Oreal, like I'm worth it. In terms of marketing, our budgets are way down, and that's Barry's experience. So we're looking at spending probably maybe 30% of what we spent last year. Yeah. And you know, really from our point of view, we're looking for value for money. We're going for reach and frequency. And that mix for us is a mix of the traditional and the new. So that the formula we have is radio and digital. And on the radio side, we sponsor the RTE Sports News. And that goes out so many times a day. And of course, what happened was sport just went. And those things went. Now, RTE gave us the opportunity during lockdown to switch our sponsorship from RTE Sport to the Joe Duffy Show or Liveline. And that kept the brand ticking along. And we sort of avoided COVID type advertising. We just went with a nice reassuring message about our 7-year warranty, and, you know, if you buy a Kia, you'll have a bit of peace of mind. And even though some manufacturers were trying to get into that space, my opinion always is that the coronavirus really belonged to the people who were doing the hard yards during the lockdown. And that would be the pharmacies and Tesco and Musgraves and food manufacturers. They'd earned their stripes. And anybody else trying to say, oh, you know, we care about you and nice piano music and all that, I just think some consumers might have been wary of that. So that's where we are. You know, we're giving it our best for June and July, hampered somewhat by budgets, and it's too early to say because our retailers were closed for 12 weeks. they're working their way now through their used car stocks and delivering cars that would have been ordered. So it's too early for us to say, you know, will consumers have the confidence to go out and make these high-end purchases in July? And so we're in wait and see territory.
And yet you should be in position A with the Soul, which is the car of the year, parked behind your head there.
Well, that's an EV, and the thing about EV is that you'll find out that a lot of manufacturers, ourselves included, who have a built-up stock of EVs. So regardless of what brand you're looking for, if you'd have found like the EV of your choice was scarce 3 months ago, you now may find it in stock at your local dealer, and that's not a plug. That's not a plug, if you'll pardon the joke. That's not a plug for Kia, but it's a plug for any manufacturer selling EVs or plug-in hybrids at the moment. Okay,
thanks very much indeed, Aidan. So the first question, and I take cognizance of what Barry said about speaking not on behalf of the advertisers, but it is very much the story of the day, so we need to talk about it. And it's the need for media transparency. Obviously, the recent ISBA survey in the UK, showing that margins of 49% on programmatic, and indeed all the talk about media kickbacks, and indeed the growth of in-housing and DIY advertising, given that budgets are going to be a little bit tighter. So just, we do need to talk about it. Don't want to offend anybody or anything else. But Barry, have you a view on this? I mean, presumably you'd want more media transparency, and you have some level of concern about costs, presumably, given that the market's going to be a bit soft.
Yeah, very much so. And I actually attended a webinar from Singapore this morning on this subject. The digital advertising expenditure is now the biggest. We all know that. But the internet is just not a safe place for brands. So back in 2017, the ANA, the Association of the National Associations in the States, launched a report, and it was called Media Transparency Guidance to Marketers. It was based on a K2 intelligence report, an independent study conducted over a 9-month period. I brought this report home with me and I presented it to all the media agencies and AAI members. But the narrative behind the report was alarming. It basically said that of every $1,000 this is spent on programmatic trading, 40% of this was going into the pockets of the media owners. 20% was going in ad fraud. A further 20% was going on ad blocking. And if you're lucky, maybe 20% was hitting your consumer. Now, this is back in 2017. And the year after, David Weldon, he was the president of the World Federation of Advertisers. He attended a Marketing Society seminar, and his opening line was that ad fraud is now the second biggest crime in the world. And just so I can define ad fraud, it's defined as any deliberate activity that prevents the proper delivery of ads to the intended audience in the intended place. Marketing spend should be spent to reach real people. Global ad fraud will reach $100 billion by 2023, according to a research company called Juniper. They did a project on the future of digital advertising, artificial intelligence and advertising fraud, 2019 to 2023. And then more recently, on Friday, May the 15th, the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers, ISBA, launched a new report, Transparency Within the Programmatic Supply Chain. This was conducted with PwC, and it builds on the WFA ANA study back in 2017. It's not getting better. ISBA's study finds that on average, publishers only receive 51% of advertising spend, while 15% of this spend is unaccounted for. It's just gone into a black hole. Despite brand safety and transparency concerns, there has been a continued growth trend in programmatic budgets. Phil Smith, who's the CEO of ISBA, said there are parts of this ecosystem that are quite simply unauditable. So the study highlights the cost of programmatic and its underlying transparency issues, offering an opportunity for the ad industry to come together and develop common standards in the UK and potentially other markets.
Yes.
So just this morning from a webinar in Singapore, Sam Tomlinson is the guy from PwC responsible for this. And he reiterated that this study was amongst the best of the best in terms of global advertisers and global tech vendors. And he said it was a credit to these 15 advertisers and 12 publishers for participating. The 15 advertisers were supporting this study, funding it. The publishers were doing it for free. His budget at the start was 300K. He spent over $1 million delivering the project. And as he said himself, he's not very popular with his colleagues in PwC. And it took 9 months to deliver. He said if there was one message to come out of this morning's session, this was the need for industry access and protocols on data access and data quality. According to Sam, getting access to the data from the tech vendors was challenging, to put it mildly. It was a nightmare. The good news from this meeting is that I doorstepped Steve Chester from ISBA and Sam from PwC, and they've agreed to do a webinar for the AAI on this. So I'm going to organise that over the next week to 10 days. The last objective of this study, according to Steve Chester and ISBA, is to look for data standardization, look for international support and pressure to drive that change. In other words, lean into it and get behind it.
Okay.
That's
okay.
the vision on programmatic.
Yeah. And indeed, presumably you're concerned about margins in general, not just on programmatic. The programmatic is the story of the day, but margins about LTAs and media kickbacks, that causes you concerns?
Well, there's two things, and it was what David Weldon said as well. You know, as advertisers, we need to look at what we've done to our supply chain. You know, when times are really tough and we were squeezing more margins out of people, but equally, agencies should be remunerated fairly, but the whole system needs to be much more transparent.
Couldn't agree with you more. Camille, have you a view?
Yeah, I think media transparency is the hot topic. And actually, I remembered when I think it was last year, Barry, you ran a session with Peter McCartland, who you mentioned is also watching. And the key message from that session, and you had advertisers and media and agencies there, was that if there's transparency, there's trust. And if you have trust, well, then you can work together. It is something that I know is not a perfect system. I know that it's incredibly complicated, and particularly with online and programmatic. I know that it started, let's say it started 10 years ago and there were no rules. From our perspective, with the agencies that I use, is that I have to constantly monitor, constantly evaluate, constantly ask questions with my agencies, and it probably may happen weekly, but it is where our audiences are, and if viewership is if more people are moving online, as a brand, I need to be online. But then as a brand guardian, I need to be very careful of the numbers that I'm being given, and I just simply ask, are people actually seeing it, and is it effective, and how can you prove it to me? So like we use OMD for our media buying, and they now have a verification company for the figures that they supply me, which I think is a good idea. And also then we use an auditor, Nigel Brophy, and he audits our media buying, and that's useful for everybody because we can take the learnings and then we can move on. And so it's but in terms of social media, then that's this, and I know what the margins are from our agencies, and then in terms of social media, it's handled by Think House, and they do the creative, and they do the placing, and they do the planning, and with them I don't pay. They don't take a margin from what they place on social. What I do is I pay them in hours for all of it together, and that seems to work for us at the moment.
Yeah, I think that fee model is actually more transparent, isn't it, than necessarily exposing yourself. If there is a margin of 50 or 60% on social, it means that if you're spending 10 grand on Facebook, only £4,000 is appearing on the platform, and advertisers are paying for it ultimately. But anyway,
okay.
No, sorry, go ahead, Camille.
No, we ask them questions. They show us the breakdown, and we get it immediately. And why are we spending more money, a little bit more money here? And the monies are very small, really, but we are actually getting very good results, particularly from Instagram at the moment. So, but it's under constant review, and that could change in 2 months' time if we review and we don't get good results.
But I think what Barry is saying as well, and it's a point well made, is simply the need for more media transparency about margins.
Definitely.
I think that's the question. Aidan, do you have a view? And I do want to say, I know Shane Lynch and John Walsh, two of the best people in the business in focus advertising who are looking after you. So I'm not saying anything bad about them because I worked them for 15 years. But do you have a view on this?
Yes, I suppose in a previous life, when you think of it, media transparency was booking a 48-sheet site on the wall of Kylie's so that Arnold O'Byrne could see it when he was on his way to work.
That never happens. It never happens.
He'd never, you know, managing directors would never, how much did you spend on that outdoor campaign? I'm not seeing any of them. So that was solved. But going back to today, yes, I think that there was, as companies moved to social media and programmatic advertising, there was a tendency in the past that the agencies would bury the production costs involved, because there is a lot of production costs involved in serving a campaign and reporting on it, but they would tend to be buried in some underbooking of what you actually wanted in terms of impressions or audiences. But our business is with Havas International, and it's a big central pitch from Korea, and they've just been reappointed recently to handle all the Hyundai and Kia business globally. But a huge part of reappointing them was that digital transparency. So now when I approve an ad schedule, I can see exactly how many eyes are being booked. But I can also see, and I just have to accept it, is that there are production costs and there are personnel involved in the agencies who book these campaigns, who report on them, but I can actually see how much that is going to cost. On the programmatic side, and we had this discussion earlier in the week, Stuart, there is a leap of faith sometimes for clients with media agencies, but we've got to personally believe in the integrity of the people that we're doing business with, in that when they say they're going to book you 1 million impressions, that they're delivering 1 million impressions. As a client, I'm always more comfortable with the direct buys. So I'm more comfortable, you know, a bit like Arnold O'Byrne on his way into town. I'm always more comfortable when an MPU is popping up on my phone when I'm browsing RTE or BBC. But in terms of reaching people, we've got to accept that. And I was on what I thought was a fairly obscure site yesterday, just doing a bit of research for today. And up pops an ad, a little MPU that my good colleague and friend Emma Toner in Opel had booked. And there it was. And I assumed that was booked as a programmatic buy. And there it was delivered. I'm somebody interested in cars. And I was on a site that I never heard of. And there was a programmatic ad. So sometimes there is a leap of faith that the agencies are delivering and programmatic does deliver. But human nature makes me more comfortable on the RTE site or BBC or the stuff that I'm reading on a daily basis. But in terms of transparency, sometimes we just have to have faith in the integrity of the people we're doing business with.
Okay. Jack, John McGee, have you a view? Systematic change or systemic change even?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing about transparency, it is a big issue, and I've written about this extensively over the last couple of years. I mean, transparency in any commercial relationship should be a given. I don't see why advertising and marketing should be any different. I mean, in my career my former career as a business journalist, I've covered pretty much every industry you can think about. And when I arrived at somewhat unwittingly in the media marketing space, I was amused to find that, you know, transparency and trust were absent from, you know, some of the relationships in the industry. So that's first and foremost, you know, it should be transparency. And a lack of transparency obviously fosters distrust, and that's not good. A good starting point from, you know, which to build a strong and profitable relationship between two parties. You know, unfortunately, you know, I think it was Barry mentioned there, but agencies, do have to make a profit. And, you know, unfortunately, the whole business about LTAs and rebates down through the years, you know, And it's been fairly widespread throughout the industry in Ireland, the UK, and the USA. There's no great secret about that. It's just talked about it on the fringes and hushed tones of the industry. And unfortunately, over the last number of years, it's been a race to the bottom. And agencies, media agencies in particular, have been taking on business at unprofitable margins. Anything between 2% and 6%, which you can't make money out of that, right? Yeah. So making money out of LTAs and rebates has become an integral part of a lot of the business models for agencies in recent years. Now, I know some agencies have been weaning themselves off that over the last couple of years, and some with mixed success. But and also media owners as well have been, I suppose, complicit in the LTAs. They don't have much choice, I suppose, because they too have to make a profit and they have to hit targets. So it's not the environment that has occurred as a result of all of this. It's not good for either the agency. It's not good for media owners, right? So this is coming out to the fore now because a lot of media owners, publishers, and broadcasters are finding it really difficult to survive, and solvency is an issue for some of them. So what's happening now is that some of the media owners are unable to pay or meet the LTA deals that they had arranged for last year. Yeah. So we're finding ourselves in a situation now where the future solvency of the agency business model as it is depends on the future solvency of the media, and which is not a good thing. So, but LTAs, if you think about them, I remember trying to explain this to an accountant friend of mine about how they worked, and he looked at me as if I had three heads, and he couldn't figure out why any company would have this kind of commercial arrangement built into its business model. And I explained to him this as well. It's not just agencies; it's media owners as well. Depend on the volume and that an agency will give it in terms of bookings, whatever. But it's still, if you think about it, and it's not a great business model to be sticking to. And as I said, agencies have been weaning themselves off this for a number of years, and as I said, with mixed success. But if you accept that agencies need to make a profit, and we do, like any other business, agencies need to make a profit, whether that's a profit margin of between 15 or 20%. So all that goes back to the relationship between the client and the agency, and how the client values that relationship. The clients value the relationship they have with their auditors, their tax advisors, their solicitors, whatever, and they're quite prepared to pay often exorbitant fees for this, and they may question these fees, and they may question along the line. But when it comes to creative services, and when it comes to media agency, it's a slightly different kind of arrangement, where advertising can be turned on and off, and they're leaving themselves open. It's also very labor intensive.
Sure, Jack, but just if I can cut across there for a second, the whole issue is transparency. You have to remember as well that back margin and LTAs are denied by agencies. I mean, the FBI investigations in the United States brought out figures where agencies said we don't take them, we don't operate them, they don't exist. So it's that level of transparency. It's also about the 15% model. As you said about architects and stuff, it's fees. I'm paying you a fee, I pay you a fee.
And
so
that's
that whole buying thing.
That's what the industry needs to kind of be established, that the value of the service being provided by the agencies, right? That service needs to be valued. Agencies need to be properly remunerated, so that they're not depending on the LTAs that they have in place with media owners. So it's a proper commercial relationship, like exists in other industries, And
a fee does that. Siobhan, sorry, it's my view. Siobhan, have you a view on this?
Yes, I do. My initial question and my biggest question from this ISBA survey is, what is this unknown 15% delta, and where is the money going? That's the biggest question, first of all. Moving on from that, then, the issue of transparency has always been, a question in the advertising industry, going back from Aidan and the poster outside Kylie's, and now it's just in this digital space, whereas in the old days it was outdoor posters, and nothing change. Transparency never seems to become, things don't seem to become more transparent. Now, maybe this report, you know, will be the turning point, but on the programmatic marketplace, my view is it has clearly consistently failed to support premium media owners. Instead, ad tech and the long tail have benefited most from the presence and content of quality publishers in the ecosystem. So that has to change going forward. How it's going to change, I don't know. So advertisers deserve a high quality advertising ecosystem, but that has to be balanced and it needs quality media. But then if the quality media cannot survive, the quality goes with it, that brings down the whole ecosystem. Yeah. And that's a matter of financials and mathematics way before you even get to transparency. Quality media properties cost money to run and they can't survive on the programmatic open marketplace as it is. And why should they? Even if they could survive, why should they generate only a fraction of the revenue that they deserve for the content they're producing that's benefiting almost everybody in the ecosystem except the publisher?
Absolutely. And part of the problem, to move on to the next question, a very nice little link here, is just that the way businesses have changed, that all businesses have become more digital business, the growth in e-commerce that we've seen over the last 12 weeks, and indeed, therefore, will digital advertising, which of course has a worse impact now in transparency, become more of an issue. Can I turn to you, Aidan, and just Brendan McElroy from CarZone sent in a report that 57% of people would consider buying a car online and having it delivered to their home. Very typically that the growth in e-commerce businesses, therefore, will it bring in more digital ad spend? Is that a view that you'd hold? And there, that gets into the programmatic problem.
I don't think necessarily, you know, that you can conflate both, you know, the e-commerce and digital advertising, because a huge amount of e-commerce is an extra part to your web platform. And web traffic is still driven by traditional media, television, radio, print to a lesser extent, and digital activity. So people will still get visitors to their website. And in fact, you know, going back to the programmatic and even online display, the click-through rate for digital advertising generally is way, way down. And as Camille and myself were discussing the other day, to a certain extent, digital advertising now is about brand awareness and eyeballs. But going back to your question in terms of e-commerce, so my answer in terms of, I don't think it'll necessarily change the media mix, but there will be a drive towards e-commerce. And at the moment, there's probably about 100 million cars sold globally every year, and 99% of those are delivered in the traditional way. So e-commerce will start happening in dealerships, but there's two ways it will happen. One is that where people will log on and go through the whole transaction. And there are companies, there's a really good company in the UK called G-Forces. They're very active in that space. So it can happen in two ways, where people will go from finding a car, you know, getting a valuation on their trade-in, ordering the car, getting it delivered and getting their trade-in received. The other alternative, and which will probably happen more in the short term, is that an awful lot of the business that is normally transacted in a dealership will be transacted online, such as the valuation of the trade-in, the finance application, all of this, finding the stock, and then maybe where somebody might have visited a dealership 2 or 3 times to transact a bit of business, they may only visit them once. So an awful lot of retailers will be able to put a lot of their normal office business, their admin business online, and that will happen. But for the moment, you know, for the next at least 5 years or so, the vast majority of cars will still be delivered in the traditional way on the foot.
Okay, Barry Dooley, you seeing a change in terms of advertisers becoming more e-commerce enabled and therefore switching their advertising more towards digital? As Jack was saying, it's about 50-50 traditional versus digital in the market at the moment.
Well, the IAB recently reported that there could be a 10 or 20% fall off on digital ad spend. So one assumes the midpoint, say 15%. could be lost from the 673 million that was registered for digital media last year, leaving roughly 572 million to play for this year. So it's significant and it's growing and likely to continue to grow. One point that I've learned is that it's estimated that Irish publishers took less than 10% of the digital ad market in 2019. You know, to your point, Siobhan.
Yeah.
And finally, the IAB and PwC measure of the online ad sector underscores the dominance that Google and Facebook, with their portfolio of platforms, have within the market here. The duopoly dominates search and social ad spending, which accounted for 79% of the digital total last year. So digital is going up and up, and will continue to do, despite all those issues in programmatic that have come out over the last.
And you'll see John McGee frothing at the mouth there, trying to get in. But before he does, because he's a great fan of the digital duopoly, Camille, have you a view in terms of your spend? Is there a switch going on, or is it more or less as it was?
It is part of our mix, the same as Aidan said. We have TV does our heavy lifting for us, and I suppose I take a step back and say what's effective, what's reaching the consumer, and actually what's memorable. So I find at times when I'm looking at digital, I'm questioning how effective is it. So do I want someone to see a TV ad which is on a big screen and you can hear the music and all of that, or do I want that ad to appear cut from 30, 40 seconds down to 10 seconds, and will the consumer see it, or will it impact them online, or will an outdoor poster in a big format match a small display on a mobile? So I bring in the qualitative aspect to it. I think I know everybody's moving online, and therefore I'm probably going to pay more attention of how it should be done effectively. But I can't see it. Our figures wouldn't be similar to 50-50. Like TV currently, with TV, if 5 years ago 80% of people in Ireland were watching TV, now I know it's eroding, and say it's 70% of adults are watching TV in Ireland. It's still a big number, and what we've been told is that actually more people, that the people that are watching TV now are watching it more often. So have I answered your question? Not exactly. I would see more money going online, but I'm very cautious about how it's done.
And I think there's a point there as well, which Aidan was making earlier. It's not necessarily about click-through rates. It's not necessarily about reaction. It's about brand awareness. And you're saying you get a great reaction to Instagram, do you not?
Yeah, we found, and actually what we're finding is that we're lucky that people are posting content about the brand, and we repost it and they start conversations about the brand, and then we get involved in those. So we have a different attitude. And the numbers for Instagram at the moment are surprisingly very good. I've been surprised by where they're at the moment. So if that continues, that's good for us.
And John McGee, who was a huge fan of the digital duopoly, will now give us a view about digital advertising, brand safety.
I'm taking up Barry's point there about 10% of Irish publishers getting their chunk of the total digital spend. I mean, when you think about it, if all other forms of traditional advertising are on the decline, whether it's press, TV, radio, or at best static, there's going to be a solvency issue for the industry at some stage in the future. I think it's already started, and we've got to ask ourselves, do we want a financially viable and solvent media industry here in Ireland, and what does that look like? Or are we going to continue to support and throw all our money in advertising money at the Facebooks and the Googles of the world? I defend that every advertiser has a right to advertise where they want, but at some stage they got to take a view as why shouldn't we be supporting the Irish media industry rather than the duopoly? But also it goes back to the agencies as well, and I know I take up Aidan's point of frequency and reach and all that kind of stuff is very important, and you can get those with Facebook and you can get that with Google as well. But you also got to take into account, I think there are a large number of premium publishers in Ireland, and perhaps you could argue too many, but they're there, and I think maybe with the tax credit that Barry mentioned. You know, if that tax credit was accepted by the minister, and maybe it should be directed at, you know, advertising on Irish platforms or with Irish media owners, rather than you know, getting a tax credit to advertise on Facebook and Google, but to advertise on you know, whether it's the Irish Times, the Indo, RTE, whatever. I think that might make a little bit more sense and might concentrate minds a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I think also it keeps media costs down as well, because the better media owners, Irish media owners do, the less the cost of advertising they don't have to compensate for. Siobhan, do you know any premium digital publishers?
Oh, let me think now. Look, as I said, I think I reiterate what I said just earlier. I think quality does matter. Quality has always mattered, and context. And going back to what both Aidan and what Camille were saying about, you know, at the end of the day, what is most effective for your brand? Is it a tiny little mobile, you know, display ad 320 by 50 that someone might scan and not even see? Or is it like, you know, a good old fashioned big bang TV ad? Digital has its place, yes, of course, but the issue of transparency has to be fixed, because it's too murky. It's too murky, and it's too much clouded in secrecy. And this ISBA survey now, I think, has hopefully opened what is a Pandora's box.
I absolutely think so, and I think as well, I know I'm going to say this and people won't like me saying it, but agencies for ad agencies and media agencies for a long time knocked digital and said digital was a waste of time, until the margin light bulb went off, and that's really what's driving an awful lot of.
Digital isn't a waste of time. This is the thing. Digital is not a waste of time. Digital is another medium, in the same way radio, TV,
correct,
poster. Every medium has its place, and it's what is the most effective at a point in time for your campaign, your reach objectives, your targeting objectives. So this is not about saying, oh, digital is not. Digital has a massive role to play, but it has to be as transparent as other mediums.
Correct. Just we've 7 minutes left. Could I just quickly go around our three guests and ask for two questions? One is the burning question. How are budgets? Are they likely to be on the low side or the high side? And when are you coming back? Is there any kind of sense of optimism? I mean, people out there are looking for a date more than a sense, but give us a sense of what kind of, you know, the rest of the year is going to look like, if you can. Any words of wisdom? Barry, could I start with you again, just in 2 or 3 minutes, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, this is from the WFA. According to the global average, media budgets are down 36% for the first half of this year, and likely to be down 31% for the full year. US and Canada down 42% for the first half, 24% for the full year. LATAM down 46% for the first half, 31% for the full year. Europe 43% for the first half, 31% for the full year, etc., etc. This was a question based at looking at your first half, Q1 and Q2 media budgets. How do you think these will be impacted? And it's a WFA study on brands' response to COVID-19 based on 38 multinational companies in the membership. So it's not very positive. And it actually tallies with Core's predictions of a 30% decline this year, which hopefully it won't be as bad as that. That's all I can help there, Stuart.
Okay. Camille, what's your view? Up, down, or are you on last year's budget at this stage?
I suppose because we're like an essential food product, our volumes are maintaining, so our budgets will hold from what we're already planned. Then I think a view will be taken after that then for the rest, for the new year. I think in terms of, I was thinking of other advertisers, I think other advertisers, other businesses will spend when they can see a return for the money, when they can see that there's an appetite for people to buy. So if they can stimulate demand, I think they'll advertise. In terms of words of wisdom, I said overall it's impacted on all of us. Personally, as an employee, as an employer, as a brand, as a business, and I think health and well-being is actually the most important, and safety. But after that, I would say supporting Irish, actually to the point earlier, I think supporting Irish and local businesses and the Irish media is a priority to help get the economy going. I think being creative and being curious and understanding your consumer, because I think that will actually help you, that will give you inspiration to do better work. And I think that now is not the time to stay quiet, if possible, with your business, because if you can support it now, it will come out better in the long run when we get through this period.
Well, here for Support Irish Media. Aidan, you presumably your advertising is linked to car sales, and car sales aren't doing as
Yes,
well as they might.
and before I answer that question, Stuart, I want to just say and agree with Camille and agree with John. When you look at the duopoly, by the way, there is a difference sometimes between Facebook and Google, because for lots of business now, Google is almost like Caesar. That money has to be rendered onto every year, whereas Facebook is a discretionary spend. It's something, a conversation you have with your media providers, whether you go for it or not go for it. But I think I had a conversation with John Gallagher of Havas yesterday in terms of supporting local media, and what Siobhan and John and Barry were saying in terms of traditionally booking media. If you were booking newspaper or broadcast media, you would have a conversation with what stations you were going on, what radio stations you were going on, what TV stations you were going on, and what media you were going on. And I think it might be a time now for media agencies to have that conversation with their clients, where they'd actually go through a list of premium advertisers and say, okay, do you want to be on independent.ie? Do you want to be on carzone.ie? Do you want to be on Daily Mail or Business Plus? And the conversation should start there. And then when you're finished that conversation and you have some, and the page impressions can't be delivered, or then go on to your programmatic advertising, rather than programmatic being the first port of call. Anyway, that's my pitch for the agency. Now, in terms of your question, spend, I think in the motor industry, the spend for July is going to be very, very conservative, because we're not sure of the return on investment. Will there be a huge amount of sales? So you have to sort of be realistic and say, if we spend all this money, are we going to get a return on investment in July? So the industry, as far as I know, are probably conserving as much budget as possible for Q4, in the hopes that the January 21 market might bounce back. But the budgets will still, as we wouldn't differ much now from the results of the WFA survey. Yeah.
And the other thing, just to mention, Fiona Barkley of Root Consultancy sent in a question about, don't forget trade press, trade media, as well as everything else. Siobhan, have you a view or words of wisdom?
Well, if I had words of wisdom now, I'd be bottling them and selling them, Stuart. No, I've no words of wisdom at this point. But I would say, I think April, May, June, July, that'll be that's the low point. We're in the low point now. We're in the low point. And, you know, I'm encouraged by the fact yesterday an ad agency got on the phone to me and was looking to block book for a large financial institution from August to the end of the year. I mean, I nearly fell up my seat, but, you know, so that's encouraging.
Even at your price.
Yeah, I know. I was kind of going, where's German Beetle? But anyway, and then I've got an airline, you know, back in September, October. There's little green shoots, but, you know, it's like everything in life. The stuff just doesn't land in your lap. You have to go out and find it. You have to graft for it. You have to be inventive. You have to be creative, and you have to try and come up with proposals that will in some way incentivize advertisers to get back into the market. But the problem for the advertisers, it's the biggest challenge of all, is, are people going to spend money? That's the big unknown. Are they going to save it or spend it?
Correct. You can open a shop and have no customers, and then you may as well be closed. But I think your incentive is exactly as Barry Dooley was saying, is that 25% type of initiative, and that's to be welcomed. And Jack, 2 minutes. So have you give us a little kind of a view and a bit of optimism?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, you know, I'm passionate about is, you know, Irish businesses and the need for Irish businesses to succeed, more so now than ever. So, you know, to reiterate that message, you know, buy Irish, buy your goods and services from Irish companies, buy your Barry's tea, buy whatever, buy Business Plus, you know, and it's important. And, you know, the retail sector in particular, retail sector in particular is going to go through a really rough patch, as we know. It's been like that for a long time. So I think it's incumbent on us all as a society to support local Irish businesses going forward, certainly for the foreseeable future. And if you can buy from online as well, rather than, you know, I've asked my daughter who buys from, you know, boohoo.com and Pretty Little Thing, is there an alternative Irish supplier that we can buy from, you know? And there's a huge opportunity in that market, I think, for any enterprising business wants to get into that youth market and where they can buy online. It may be a huge ask, but certainly I think, you know, a lot of Irish businesses are now moving on online or extending their offering online. I think, again, you know, we should be encouraging them and supporting them where possible.
Absolutely, and I think as well, if there's a message to go out from this on behalf of advertisers, that if advertisers, I mean, they can spend the money as they will, and they should spend it in the right and proper way, but where they can, to keep an eye to Irish media owners, I think would be a great initiative in itself, and would certainly help the whole economy, and that's help all of us in the long term. Okay, it's 2 p.m, so that's a wrap. Thank you very much, Siobhan. Thank you very much, Camille. Thank you very much, Aidan, and of course Barry, and indeed John McGee. Jack and Siobhan will be with us next week. So now, with our thanks very much, just nice casually, just give us a wave and we'll end it there. Thanks ever so much, and thank you very much for watching every week. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.